Hey to YouTube, it's me. I am back with yet another list. I know you're probably getting tired of these. I hope the video quality for this video is better than it was for my last video. Anyway, I started thinking about this list a couple of days before I wrote my last one, and it took me a while to compile just even 5 UFC fights that I enjoyed heavily, because almost all the ones I have seen are just that good. But nonetheless, here are my top 10 UFC fights that went the distance, which means that they either went the full 5 rounds or the full 3, depending on if it was a title fight or not. Also, fair warning, this list does contain spoilers, so if there are fights that you haven't seen, then stop watching now. Number 10, Michael Bisping vs Yoshihiro Akiyama, UFC 120. Let's kick off the list with one of the last fights of 2010. While the fight itself is far from either fighter's best performance in the octagon, it's still a very memorable brawl. These two showed a high amount of respect for each other both before and during the fight, even in the last round when Akiyama accidentally caught a foot to the groin. He recovered though, and he and Bisping managed to put on a pretty damn good fight together to help get the final quarter of 2010 rolling. Number 9, Sam Stat vs Spencer Fisher 3, UFC on FX Maynard vs Guida. I don't remember too much about this fight, except for the fact that it was the most exciting one on the card. I will admit, while I had heard that the previous two fights between these guys were good, I never actually got around to watching them, but when I saw this fight, I can safely say that it definitely lived up to the hype, and it was a great way to bring their trilogy to a close. The last fight between Stat and Fisher was a bloody war, which I'm talking about this fight being the last fight, and it was amazing every step of the way. Number 8, excuse me. Number 8, Demetrius Johnson vs Ian McCall, UFC on FX, Alvarez vs Campman. The only fight on this list to have ended in a draw. Johnson and McCall was one of 2 fights that were set in motion to determine who would become the UFC's flyweight champion. Well, one of 3 actually. It was in the quarterfinals, or is kind of what I meant to say. Moving on. While I like the fight itself because of how amazing it was McCall that impressed me more between the two, as it was his UFC debut. Even though it was Demetrius Johnson that would eventually capture the gold later on, it's hard to choose who I would like more between the two, as they put on such an amazing fight. Number 7, Nate Diaz vs Don Cerrone, UFC 141. I was unsure if I wanted to put this one on the list, considering that most of the way through it was just Diaz outboxing Cerrone, but in the end, I just couldn't say no. Excuse me. As the fight was part of the card that was the last event of 2011, it was worth the wait, especially considering how much momentum these two had going into the fight. Diaz came out on top, but Cerrone's never say die attitude really impressed me, and the fight was pretty awesome. Number 6, Leonard Garcia vs Nam Fan, The Ultimate Fighter Season 12 finale. Anybody who has seen Leonard Garcia fight before knows that he's pretty much the king of long, amazing awards that often result in controversial calls, which is quite prominent here as he sadly lost this fight. But he didn't go down without doing some major damage to Nam Fan, who I was seeing for the first time in this battle. After a long, bloody and tense war, Nam Fan got his hand raised, but Leonard kept his head up high just like a champ. Check me out being all profound and whatnot. Number 5, Frank Yeager vs Benson Henderson, UFC 144. This fight is proof that not every battle between 2 wrestlers is going to be 2 guys laying on top of each other trying to get something going. While there was a fair amount of wrestling in the fight, it was mostly kept standing between the two. Between the main event of the being the main event of the first UFC card to be held in Japan, both Edgar and Henderson knew they had to give it their all, which is exactly what they did. Amazing fight and a real crowd pleaser at that too. Number 4, Mauricio Shogun Hua vs Dan Henderson, UFC 139. A lot of you probably expected that this one was going to be on the list at some point, as one of the last fight cards in the waning months of 2011. This one was truly memorable because it was 2 former Pride legends that had never fought before in Pride, and it was a fight that I myself had always wanted to see happen. And man was I happy when it finally came to fruition. First Henderson would get dropped, then Shogun, then Hendo again. It's hard to pick a standout moment from this one, except for maybe the part where Henderson accidentally punched himself and survived somehow. Henderson did pull out the win, but it was a brilliant fight all the way through. Number 3, John Jones vs Alexander Gustafsson, UFC 165. Yet another one I bet people were expected to see on the list. Probably the most recent event on this list. It's not only fresh in my memory, but deserving of its status as one of the literally biggest fights of the year. John Jones was on a tear through the light heavyweight division, and after becoming champion, he looked unstoppable. Then there was the Swedish Nate Augustusson, who was on a rampage of his own. So what happened when these two met? One of the best fights I've ever seen, that's bloody what. Although Jones won the fight and kept his belt, it was the fact that Gustafsson proved that Jones was human that stands out the most, I think. Number 2, Diego Sanchez vs Clay Guida, The Ultimate Fighter Season 9 finale. This is the first fight I ever saw Clay Guida in, and it was probably one of the first ones I watched online. I truly enjoyed this one when I first saw it, and I still enjoy it today. While the whole 15 minutes of fighting between the two is fireworks from start to finish, it's the first round that's probably the best remembered, due to the fact that Clay Guida took a nasty kick straight to the jaw, falling flat on his ass, and he managed to somehow survive that. To me, this whole fight was a tipping point for both Guida and Diego Sanchez, and it re-established both of them as standouts in the lightweight division. And now for my number 1 pick. Anyone who knows I'm a fan of UFC probably knows I've banged on about this fight enough, but here it is. Forrest Griffin vs Stephan Bonnar, The Ultimate Fighter Season 1 finale. You know, you really never forget your first. I remember how high my anticipation was for the first UFC Undisputed video game in 2009, and my uncle, also a UFC fan, decided to show me a fight from the UFC which turned out to be the final light heavyweight fight to close out the first ever season of The Ultimate Fighter. And every second of it still somehow scribbled into my tea-addled brain. Even though Forrest won the fight, it was the performance from both of them that was the big headline. At one point, over 1 million people were watching the fight, and it gave a new popularity to the sport, as well as giving the sport itself what is, in my opinion at least, one of the best fights ever, and the best fight in the UFC. So, thank you for watching. I really hope that this video quality was a lot better, and my next video actually will not be a list. I will be writing a list for the next video afterwards, but my next video will actually be a challenge that has been issued by a good friend of mine. Shout outs to my friends, my family, my scarlets, and if I've missed you, then you get a shout out as well. Anyway, take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next video. I have no idea when that will be. I'm hoping to try and post on a regular basis, but no promises. And yeah, I'll see you later. Take care.